Sri Lanka has recently been under the spotlight as far as the violation of human rights goes. 13 international human rights organizations have now issued a joint statement condemning the Sri Lankan authorities' human rights violations. The statement goes on to highlight that the failure to respect human rights could jeopardize and delay Sri Lanka's ability to recover from the current economic crisis that the country is facing, including the country's ability to attract essential international support.
The signatories to the joint statement include Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, the International Commission of Jurists, Asian Forum for Human Rights and Development, Civicus, the International Federation for Human Rights, Franciscans International, Frontline Defenders, the International Movement Against All Form of Discrimination and Racism, the International Service for Human Rights, the Sri Lanka Campaign, the International Working Group on Sri Lanka, and the World Organization Against Torture. Issuing a joint statement, the organizations condemned the Sri Lankan authorities' violent crackdown on increasing reprisals against peaceful protesters in Sri Lanka. This includes arrests, intimidation and the brutal attacks on the protest camp in Colombo on the 22nd of July. The joint statement by organizations including Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch and International Commission of Jurists highlights that the failure to respect human rights, both civil and political, and economic, social and cultural rights may jeopardize and delay the country's ability to respond appropriately to the economic crisis, including its ability to attract essential international support. The statement goes on to note that the Sri Lankan authorities should immediately stop reprisals against anti-government protesters and guarantee people's rights to free and peaceful expression of their grievances safely and without fear of arrest or violence. According to the joint statement, the 13 organizations are deeply concerned by reports that journalists who have been covering the protests have been targeted by the authorities. The statement highlights that journalists and those broadcasting on social media have been arrested, interrogated, and had criminal cases filed against them for their work. The statement makes clear that journalists and others involved in monitoring or reporting on protests are entitled to protection under the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. The joint statement has also called for authorities to ensure that security forces do not use excessive force and will respect the rights of peaceful protesters at the Gotagogama site, which the authorities have ordered to be vacated. According to the statement, in recent days, Sri Lankan allies have repeatedly called on the government to respect human rights, but their message has not been heeded. The statement stresses that Sri Lanka's international partners should now make it absolutely clear that the government needs to uphold its human rights obligations. The 13 organizations added that they have documented attacks against protesters, media outlets, human rights defenders, and religious and civil society organizations following the swearing-in of the new president and cabinet on the 21st and 22nd of July. The incidents highlighted in the statement includes coordinated crackdowns on the 22nd of July, a coordinated joint operation by the Sri Lankan military police and special forces forcibly removed parts of the 3-month-long Gotagogama rolling peaceful protest sites located in the front of the Presidential Secretariat in Colombo. Criminalization of protesters during the state of emergency. The joint statement says that under the presidency of Ranil Wickremesinghe, legal reprisals against peaceful protesters and those perceived as protest leaders have increased. The statement says protesters, including human rights defenders, have been charged with taking part in unlawful assemblies. The statement noted that peaceful gatherings in public spaces within sight and sound of the intended target of the protest cannot be deemed an unlawful assembly. It adds that they must be facilitated. The 13 international rights organizations have made the following recommendations. Number 1. End the clampdown on dissent and ensure that people can exercise their rights to freedom of expression and peaceful assembly safely without fear of reprisals. Number 2. Conduct a prompt, independent and impartial inquiry into the crackdown that took place on the 22nd of July. Number 3. Revoke the emergency regulations that provide overbroad, unchecked powers to law enforcement officials and enable further abuses of human rights. Number 4. Drop all charges for participation in an unlawful assembly brought against peaceful protesters and release unconditionally those facing such charges. Number 5. Ensure that journalists, lawyers and human rights defenders have safe access to the protest sites and allow them to carry out their professional duties without fear of reprisals. Number 6. Protect the physical safety of anyone taken into custody by the security forces. Number 7. Stop labeling peaceful protesters as criminals or terrorists, and lift all travel bans and other conditions imposed on peaceful protesters solely because of their role in organizing or participating in the protests.